Estados Unidos, e vamos começar por esta sala. Eu vou passar um bocadinho para o inglês para eles ficarem contextualizados, senão eu estou aqui a fazer a apresentação em português e eles estão a olhar. So I'll start speaking in English so that you can understand what is going on. Okay? We'll make a tour and we're in the first room of the main exhibition. The theme is autobiography in comics, and this story by Justin Green is considered to be the first autobiographical story in comics. As you know, modern comics comes from the 19th century, so it took a long while for autobiography to be a genre in comics. Why this long wait? There are many explanations. One of them can be that comics is a language more suitable to the imaginary than to capture real life events. But the man who discovered this interior voice that the narrative should have was Justin Green, that is right here, and with this story published in 1972, and already using techniques like zip-a-tone before the Japanese. Yes. And can you tell us a little about the story itself? And did you know that it was something so different from everything else, and it would be so influential as it was?
Well, first I must say that I didn't steal this from the Japanese.
No, they stole from you.
No, sidetrack, okay. 1971, the Vietnam War was raging, and there was a lottery to determine who had to go. And I had a very high number, but if you were up to, like, say 150, you had a good chance of going to Vietnam. And every day, boys my age were being killed and maimed in battle, and I thought, I can't have fun as a cartoonist making jokes. I have to do a serious story. But what story? And all my conscious life, I had been obsessed with a growing condition that had no name at the time. We know now that it's about obsessive-compulsive disorder. Mine happens to be in religious terms, but there are many other kinds. But in 1971, I was crying in the wilderness, and there was a movement to San Francisco of artists who shared the same artistic bent. It was very anti-authoritarian. We were all influenced by Mad Magazine. We disdained the idea of the artist as decorating for the upper class. We were excited by mass media. And so at the time, the tarot was very popular. Everyone was dabbling in magic and mysticism, and so I wasn't quite sure what to do with the story, so I began with a very powerful image. I took the 8th card of the tarot, that is strength. It's a woman prying open the mouth of a lion, except in my case, I made it Binky, this adolescent character, being told to speak my son. And so this was kind of like, whenever I was like confused about what I was going to do next, I would look at this image and I would meditate on it. Speak, say what's important. Now, I'm often spoken of as the originator of the autobiographical form, but I couldn't claim such a mantle. It's what we call a low-hanging fruit. You know, it's there for the plucking for anyone. Talk about history or romance. It's just the genre. You talk in your own voice. If I didn't do it, somebody else would. But what I did do was embody the origination of a neurosis. And looking back at this, I wonder how reckless and desperate I could have been to gamble knowing that undertaking this work would force me to have a catharsis, a psychological catharsis. Should I still be talking?
Yeah.
Okay. So I plunged into it, not knowing exactly where I was going, but knowing that the doing of the work would influence my condition. And I hung all the pages on clotheslines in my apartment. So I worked on them all at once. It wasn't like sequential. Every page is kind of like its own entity. And at the time I thought nothing of taking work that I'd spent 4 or 5 days on. Oh, this doesn't work. I don't like it. Now the thought of wasting like 10 minutes annoys the hell out of me, you know what I mean? But at the time I had that reckless spirit of adventure, and it was a completely different ethic at the time with the hippie movement. You know, it wasn't about a product, it was about a message. So I knew that I was going to be very word heavy. It wasn't writing. Comics is not literature as we know it. It's more like songwriting. So I knew that the voice, like in a Superman comic, that usually says, 4 days later, or after the serum wore off, that would be my voice. So this is like the voice of authorship. Whenever it's in a box like that, that's like the first person. And the wonderful thing about comics is you can either contradict what you've written with the image, or you can strengthen it with the action. It's such a wonderful, pliable form, and it's one of the only forms that has the interior monologue, the thought balloon. I'm sure you know what a thought balloon is. All of a sudden, when a balloon has scallops around it, it's a different voice than this one. Do you understand? Like, this is the voice of the author, this is the character, and this is the thought of the character. So it's a multi-dimensional voice, which is great for a Jewish Catholic. Because you're always questioning, you know, what am I doing? Or is this right? Or why? You know, so it allows for a pliability and what I would call hiding. You can hide in the thought, or where's the center of this? So I kept moving along, and I wonder if you're familiar with the term synchronicity. It comes from Jung, who I understand is more popular in Europe than he is in the United States. It's more than chance. It's when you have a heightened awareness of things that are happening at the same time, and so there seem to be coincidences that happen in your life that come into the work. So here we found an old catechism book in the bottom of a box of old clothes. It was exactly the book that I had at the time. So things that when you start art with a certain energy, all the world around you offers information, and there are very fortuitous events that contribute to the art. So I knew, and those things seem to confirm the legitimacy of what you're doing. If those lucky chances come along, you know that what you're doing has a drive behind it. And so as time wore on, I knew that I had to lead to this catharsis. And I don't see it here. The book isn't arranged in the sequence that I did it. But here, here it is. Maybe I'd like to forget the obvious. So at the time, believe me, not many people had short hair. But, I knew the thing about obsessive compulsive disorder is you know that what you're doing is artificial. Like some people straighten chairs, or some people wash their hands, or some people have to say a prayer so many times, or people have rituals with numbers, or you have to go back in the house and turn, did I leave the stove on? So the part of me that was writing the book knew that my habitual behavior was conditioned. That wasn't really me. I'm the person that sees this. So I thought if I had a ritual, that it would be the catharsis that I needed. And it gave the book a kind of a tension leading up to it. And then it unfolded after the discovery that there is no reality to my fascination and awareness of my hands and feet and sexual organ. It's not real. But I have to push it. I have to go through this event of smashing.
Informamos os visitantes que no auditório do piso -1 vai dar início um encontro-debate com Vítor Mesquita sobre o processo criativo dos livros Eternos 9, Filho do Cosmos e A Cidade dos Espantos, moderado por Pedro Mota. Obrigado.
Okay. So the catharsis was both a personal experience and an element of the book. And I often wonder, the response from the book came from many people who were aware of the propensity to have these obsessions, but they didn't actually have them. And they say that 4 out of 100 people have this condition called OCD, but I think maybe 15 out of 100, many more are aware of it. It's like a dormant condition. And I also think many artists are in the club. And cartooning is a wonderful medium that allows for both draftsmanship and control, and at the same time flexibility. It allows for freedom and at the same time control. So, yeah.
How do you feel all these years later about seeing your work that you did so long ago?
I'm embarrassed by the technical blunders. At the time, I was kind of feeling in the dark. So anything goes. When you're inexperienced, you can be a primitive, and that's considered a virtue. But when you work for many decades at your craft, you're expected to have a much higher level of draftsmanship. So of course I'm embarrassed by the quirkiness and clunkiness of it, and yet the irony is that the things that I do now that I have technical mastery are not regarded as highly as the things I did when I was, 26 years old. I've often thought of forging a work, doing a drawing that says, like 1976, and pouring beer on it, But,
Okay. Any more questions for Justin before we go to the next room?
Well, question, Justin, for you to do this work, you had to have a publisher.
Oh, that's right.
And I believe it was Ron Turner at the time. Nobody else had considered doing a 40-page, page after page. That was insane. It was crazy. So what did Ron Turner say when you gave him this idea of doing a whole one-story comic. It was unheard of.
I should have mentioned that. It's unthinkable that the work could have begun without the cooperation of the publisher, who just moved to town. He was new, and he was willing to try new things, and I convinced him that I had this obsession, that I had to do this work. And so he'd come by every month and look at the clothesline, and he'd say, "What's going on here?" I'd say, "Don't worry, you know. I said I'd do 3 pages a month, you know, and I'm getting there." And so I was pretty close to my deadline, and he would give me a little bit of money each time. And he's a very generous soul and a very stabilizing influence. The underground wouldn't be the same without Ron Turner. We often forget the role of the publisher, and especially the booksellers too. But I just want to say one thing in conclusion, that even though I'm a messenger from the previous century, and I'm not getting out of this century, I like to think that my best work is still ahead of me. And I have some very ambitious projects, and it's really wonderful to have the affirmation that people appreciate my work. I can't tell you how much that means to me, because I really put myself out there, you know? And I just hope that with what life force remains to me, that I do something with this intensity that has meaning for many people, and that will last long after my passing. And so thank you for your support here in Amadora. It means a lot.
Thank you for doing it. Thank you.
Okay. So, on to the next room. These are also autobiographical comics. This room is mostly about autobiographical comics. So we have to talk, and even though the rooms are